Hi, I'm Melissa at last, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to my garden, Rose Ether Cherubim. It's great to see you, friend. And we have been talking about not only some heavy topics, we have been talking about things that make us better and help us grow. We've been having some tough love topics, and now we're really talking about the greatness of this walk and God making you a leader and building your leadership skills. And the main way we do that is, of course, verbally, right? But also by leading by example. So our life now matches our message that we're putting out into the world. Everything we do, we know that we're an example for the upcoming generations, for people new in the faith, for people who are reviving their faith. Through us, they get to see what's possible because, like through Christ, we got to see what is possible. And our love and our relationship with God is the model and is the forefront in everything that we do. And this is why we spoke so heavily about consistency. This is why we spoke so heavily about building habits and discipline and doing things when motivation is not quite there. And by building our habits, by being consistent, by being disciplined, we promote all these things and we prove to God that we're ready to do the heavy work, that we're ready to put our hand on the plow, and that we're ready to do the work that is necessary, that He called us to do, that He chose us to do. So the big things today are our example, how we're moving in action, and how when we show who we are through our actions and through our lifestyle, that builds integrity within us. And that builds integrity in everything that we do. And integrity is such a blessing to have in your life. It's such a blessing for it to be a part of your character and such a blessing for it to be a part of your reputation. And God is building all of that, has built it already within you. And now it's showing up in your environment. It shows up in everything you move and how you look, how you speak, and in how you're treating people that come into your life. You know, there's a big saying about how you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat the wait staff, how they treat the waitress or the waiter, or people who are in the service industry, right? If you treat them with respect and you treat them with manners, thank you, appreciate that. You know, you tip well. All of those things are a sign of good moral character, of knowing that even though that's their job to do that, that they still need to be treated with respect and honored, and that you are experiencing a privilege by being served. So the verse that corresponds to what we're talking about today, we've talked about it before, and it's 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12. And we went into great depth about this verse particularly, but I'm going to go ahead and read it to you one more time. Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in your word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, and in purity. And we talked about purity being the representation of your lifestyle matching your morals. People are going to want to take purity and make it to mean a whole bunch of things, particularly attuning it to having to deal with sex. And that's not necessarily what's being spoken about here. This is about your moral standards and you living in those moral standards. So I also wanted to bring up some correlating verses, and we're going to be jumping into Peter. So if you like a cross reference, which I love a cross reference, we are going next into 1 Peter, and we're going to go chapter 5, verse 3. And again, the things that 1 Timothy talked about, your charity. Well, let's go back so we can So charity in conversation, in the word, in spirit, and in your faith, and having a good, strong faith and beginning to model that. That is, people really need that. They need that to be modeled for them. And those are the things that we need to keep close to us is how strong is our spirit? How strong is our faith? How are we moving in purity? And how are we moving in charity? How are we giving to others? How are we free flowing with what God has given us? And we know that it's going to come back to us, but we do it because this is what feels right to our spirit. This is what honors God. So now jumping to the cross reference. We got first Peter 5. Sorry, I keep jumping to 2 Peter, which we are going to jump into 2 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 3. Let's jump to 2, because this is particularly talking about charity. 2. Feed the flock of God, which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not by filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. This is because this is what we do. This is who we are. We are loving, and we are a representation of God. And the way that God gives to us, we do our best, and we try our strongest, and we try our hardest to replicate that within the world. So 3. Neither as being lords over God's heritage, but being in samples to the flock. So we're not there to be above and to look down and to force doctrine on anybody. Because that's what the Pharisees did. That's what the Sadducees did. And they have to pay heavily for that. And this is what Christ came and he went in on them about this. Where it's like, you think that you're better because of the way that you understand the word. Because you hold a position of a priest. You hold a position of authority, but that does not make you better than the next person. And somebody who truly loves God understands that. And we move through that and we keep that example. Because there's plenty of people who are going to want to do it. They can't wait to get in front of a crowd, or they can't wait to get above people that they can loiter over. Loiter? Loiter? It's a word. But basically to exert control. That they want to exert control over, because they might know a little bit more. They want to show off their intelligence in a way that belittles people who are still wanting to learn, who are needing to learn, and who have a lot of blank spaces where they're waiting for God's wisdom and knowledge to be bestowed upon them. So we're not there to do that. We're not there to push something or shame people into because they don't know or they haven't figured it out yet. We're there to serve them. We're there to be an example of what is possible within them, so that they look within and they turn their eyes to God and they begin to do the work necessary to have that close relationship, because it's possible. And we are just there as an example of all things that are possible. Okay, so the next corresponding verse is 2 Peter. We're going to go in chapter 1 and we're going to do verses 5 through 7. But let's go up to 3, because this is more playing into the example. And again, we're in 1 Timothy, now in 1 Peter and 2 Peter. And all of these are how we're supposed to uphold ourselves, how we lead by example. So verse 3 tells us, according to his divine power, hath given unto us all things that pertain unto life and godliness, and through the knowledge of him that has called us to glory and virtue. 4. Whereby are given unto us exceedingly great and precious promises, that by these ye might be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust. So we are not doing things that tend to pull people astray in the world. That's us living our morals through our lifestyle. And we show that a divine nature, God flowing through us. We are examples of a divine nature by how we move, by how we do things, by how we treat each other, how our spirit shines through us because we're spending that time with God. And that's the only reason we shine a certain way, is because our Father, He bestows His light upon us when we're spending that time with us. The same reason when Abraham came down after spending that time with just him and God, and he had this glow about him that freaked people out, that scared them a little bit. People are going to recognize that, and they do recognize that within you. And you continue to be that example, and you don't dim your light by loitering over them, by treating anybody wrong, and not moving in accordance to your faith. And 5, verse 5, and besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and to the virtue knowledge. 6, and to knowledge temperance, and to temperance patience, and to patience godliness. And patience is a big deal. It's something that is important to have in your repertoire, in your arsenal. You have to have that patience. That is a true crown to wear. Because again, temperance, being balanced in all things, having patience, then that leads next to godliness. And you see that here in Peter. And a lot of these things were we're also talking about faith virtue and knowledge virtue. So again, having that understanding, knowing where to fill in the blanks for people, you mix that in with patience, right? And that godliness comes through you because you are taking your time with people. You're not irritable. You're not overwhelmed. You're not any of those things, because God is flowing through you in those moments, and God wants people to know Him and come to Him. So our Father has patience. And if we can exhibit that, we can be closer to our Father. We can be a resemblance of our Father, like we already are. And then again, the bread and butter of it all, the meat and potatoes of it all, is our faith. Being in strong faith and showing that at all times, and showing it to not be wavering in any way. And then people can begin to understand what that is, what that looks like, here in the physical. And then finally 7, and to godliness, brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness, charity. So charity is a big thing too. Being there for people, being kind to them, and giving to them when we can, as we can, or finding them resources that can give to them, and having that ready for the next person, because we want to minimize any unnecessary suffering that's happening in the world if we can do it. So these are the ways that we begin to move as a leader, and we lead by example, and to show that how we've grown, and to show God that we're ready to continue doing this work. Not only start, but continue it, because we're growing in every interaction with people, and we're getting better at it. We're getting stronger at it, and we know how to take care of people. And that is something that is vital. It's necessary to continue in this walk and to continue helping people. The more people that you bring to God and let them know what's possible, the more you're honoring our Father. And that's ultimately what we're here to do. So the actions have to match your words. They have to. Your lifestyle has to be a representation of God's message. And we discussed all the ways that happens: charity, faith, spirit, patience, brotherly kindness, temperance. All of these things are built upon each other so that we are bringing God's greatness, God's will more heavily unto this earth. So any inconsistencies in your demeanor, in your actions, in the way that you may treat one person different than the next, and any projections, that has to be eliminated, because that takes away not only from your authority but your reputation. and people begin to question it. And thus, since you're a representation of God, they may even begin to question God. And you don't want that. You don't want people to look at you and be like, yeah, well, and this happens often, and we know, yeah, they're in the church, or yeah, they claim God, but look how they act. And that totally just diminishes any of the good works that you can do or that you had been doing because you had a bad day or because you show favoritism in some sort of way. So you have to move diligently, carefully, with accountability, understanding the lengths of your responsibility now that you've gotten to this point in your walk. And all of these scriptures are going to continue to apply. And there are things to continue to bounce your thought processes off of, so that, am I moving in patience? Am I moving in charity? Am I moving in knowledge? Am I speaking in a way to control, or am I speaking in a way to be an example? Is this movement, is this choice that I'm making being controlling over the people who look to me or rely on me or need answers in this moment? Or am I showing a proper example? And then these are things that you ask and you bring to God, and we have to meditate on them constantly. Constantly be evaluating, doing that self-inventory, because again, the work is that important. And it may seem tedious, but when you are ironing out all the kinks of, because talking with different people, coming into contact with different people, it's something that is not the same every time. There's going to be differences, there's going to be nuances, and you have to be able to pick up on those things. And meditating on the verses, meditating on 1 Timothy 4:12, 1 Peter 5:3, 2 Peter 1:5-7, actually 3-7. All of those things, you'll be able to pick out the nuances and how to say this or how to conduct this way, how to treat people, and not only what to say, but how to lead them properly, and by being the example, treating them with respect and moving as what is possible. So when I was younger, I dated an atheist, and I'm talking like high school years. And again, most atheists are just people who are angry at God. I've come to realize over the years. And when people would ask, like, what do you believe? He would say science. I believe in science. And they'd be like, okay, well, what do you believe? And they would ask me, and I'd be like, well, I believe in both. I know science and evolution. There's proof to that. I said, and I also believe in God. And I would have to bring that down a little bit because it would make him angry. And it would be like a point of an argument, of how could I prove that God is real? Science is proven, but you can't prove God. And I was like, you can't disprove God either. So there's that. But I really didn't know how to formulate an argument. And I was like, just wanting to kind of be a peacekeeper in the situation. And I minimized like my love for God and bringing him up and talking about him for the sake of a relationship. And it grew very tiresome. And of course, that relationship didn't work out. And it felt, when I finally left that relationship, it felt like such a relief, because I feel like I could believe in God without this constant critique and this feeling of being fake, not being authentic, and having to wear a mask and minimize my beliefs. And when I would encounter things that felt like God, or thanking God out loud when I'm like, oh my God, thank you, and always being questioned, like, well, why aren't you thanking me? I'm the one that made so and so happen. And it was a lot of like ugly energy that it felt freeing. It felt really good to not have in my life anymore. And that was a time where I realized my faith and my belief, I can't be like interlaced with things or with people that are that disrespectful to God, or that angry at God to the point where they're going to attack somebody who does believe. And it doesn't matter all the other great qualities about a person, if that's a deal breaker for me. That's something that not only that I can't deal with, I don't want to. I truly don't want to. I don't want to have to. I will defend my God. You know, I will try to talk to people who are angry and like get them to bring it down a notch. But somebody who's blatantly disrespectful, who just decided to be angry at God and just say all these things and attack me for having faith and making me feel like I have to hide things. That was a time that my actions and living a life that didn't match my faith, that didn't match my message, that didn't match what was true in my heart. And I really, really learned that this is my boundary. This is something that I cannot deal with. And this is not a life that I want to live where I have to hide this. And I have to keep, you know, all the great things that I'm feeling within me regarding my faith, regarding what's happening to me in the spirit, and I have to keep it quiet. I have to keep it hidden, especially from a romantic partner. It's like I'd rather be alone and celebrate God and live in a way where how I feel and what I'm thinking and my relationship with God as it's growing, like that's what takes up the room and that's what takes up the space. And I'd rather it be respected, even if you don't agree with it. Why is it that it couldn't be respected? And that's how I began to learn that living an inauthentic life and not living and being around people who move in that kindness, who move in that charity, who have faith, it really like broke my heart and it really brought me down. So that was a time that no, I couldn't do it. I had to change everything around me, and my life needed to match the message that God was giving me. It needed to match my love for God. And no matter how many times I have to rebuild to get it right, I will rebuild to get it right, because this is what's important. And even still thinking about it now, it brings my heart down a little bit. But I guess it was a time that I wasn't living authentically, and I never want to go back to that. So that's what really changed and got me into moving forward of I have to live. I always called it be free. I have to live and be free, like to be who I am and feel how I am and think how I want to think without having to hide it away. And again, be authentic and lead by example and live in all the things that uplift my spirit and ultimately bring me joy and bring me closer to God. So you can lead by example, particularly looking at these verses that we talked about, living and making sure that your faith is strong, that your spirit is free. Like how I used to say, it's free. And it's living in a place, no matter how many times you have to rebuild, no matter how many times you have to restart, that it's living in a space where you can cry out to God in joy, in pain, in the multitude of emotions that we feel through this experience. You have to have that freedom to let your spirit move. So remove yourself from the things that don't allow you to live authentically and thus lead by example. You know, make sure that your life is matching what your spirit wants it to match, that your message, the message that God is giving you and placed within you, that there's so much room for that and no room for the things that try to get in the way of that. And move away from people who you feel like you have to hide your faith and hide your love for God from. Remove yourself from that the best that you can. And again, no matter how many times you have to restart, no matter how many times you have to rebuild, do it until it's right. And you stay consistent in not only your words and your actions, you're going to rebuild in a way that gets it right. You're going to make an environment for yourself that is filled with the Holy Spirit, that you have a special place for God, where God visits and dwells within your home and within your spirit and within every aspect of your life. And you do that, and then you become the example for others to be free and let their spirits move in a way that brings God joy, that brings God's will so far reaching, just because you did the work, just because you're living the life and you're walking the path the way that God called you to walk. People see that God is calling you, that God has chosen you, and the way that you're moving, and it breaks them free of their illusions. So you become, the generational curse breaker. You become the people that you become the person that takes the chains off the people by the way God is moving you, by the way God is illustrating through you. And you lead by example. You're already doing that. And you continue to do that as you're bringing God's work to fruition. And I know God is so proud of you. I love you. And God loves you so much more. And we're going to talk again. See you later.